Hey guys, welcome back to The Market is Open. Check out our website, themarketisopen.com. So I wanted to go over this debate between Gene Munster and Craig Irwin. Gene Munster has had quite the track record with tech stocks, and he's been analyzing Tesla lately. He used to be an analyst at Piper Jaffray, but now he's a VC, but he's still analyzing technology stocks. Apple has been a huge one for Gene Munster, and he's been right on it for maybe the last 16 years on Apple. Even just recently, and Apple was at $140 per share in the middle of last year. But a few months ago, he said that Apple would go to $350 to $400, and then Apple did in fact go to around $330 per share. It actually more than doubled from the lows, which very few people thought would happen. So it's also always nice to hear Gene's take on Tesla, and that's what we'll be looking at in this video, and he has been quite bullish on the stock. On the other side, we have Craig Irwin, who's a Tesla bear, and I mean, maybe Tesla gets smashed to bits tomorrow thanks to coronavirus, but so far Irwin has been dead wrong about Tesla, so this should be interesting as we look at what these two have to say about Tesla. But first, please subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the bell button to get notified when we put up new Tesla content, and hit the like button to help support this video. Okay, so this interview was from about a week ago, just after Tesla raised that $2 billion in cash, and Tesla shares were in the high $700 range. It seems that CNBC was actually a bit more positive than usual about Tesla because they started by asking Craig Irwin, doesn't this capital raise put the biggest bear case to rest? And Irwin is an analyst at Roth Capital. MD, by the way, it says MD here, is actually managing director, so that's a little bit misleading. So his reply to that is, why does Tesla actually need another $2 billion? He thinks it's because they're going to reverse the lean out of the channel and they're going to increase R&D and SG&A spending. So basically they're going to spend all of their money and reverse all of the good things that have happened in the last few quarters. So I think that's incorrect. Elon doesn't actually work that way. He doesn't like to blow money on nothing. He's only spending on things that have value for the company. But it does seem like Tesla can spend a little bit more, and Elon did say that if it makes sense, he is going to spend the money. And so in return, Tesla will be growing faster. And also I think that the lean out that Craig Irwin says will actually reverse, because at the end of last year in 2019, Tesla did sell off a ton of their inventory, which is actually really good, and it's cheaper to maintain less inventory. Inventory is really the bane of existence of any retailer, especially if Tesla is paying money to store these vehicles in warehouses or in parking lots somewhere. It does cost a lot of money, so having less inventory is beneficial for Tesla. And it's going to allow Tesla to make room for the latest models, so they're going to basically refresh their entire inventory for this year, for 2020. And as you know, Tesla doesn't really have a year associated with their vehicles like other car makers do, so they're constantly adding new features when they're ready, like new hardware, and they're not bound by the yearly cycle that other automakers tend to use. So then I thought it was interesting that CNBC asked him, what's going to happen if I told you that Tesla's going to build another factory in China? So Craig thinks for a second and he says, whoa, wow, like they're going to need some demand for that. So does Tesla in fact have demand for more vehicles in China? I think they actually do, especially with Model Y in the pipeline and the huge number of orders we've seen for Cybertruck. They've had over 500,000 orders, according to some sources, on Cybertruck. So it does sound like Tesla has quite a bit of demand and they can open a bunch of new factories. It's funny because Craig actually says that he doesn't even think Tesla needs extra cash for their current factory in China, which is currently producing 1,000 vehicles per week. So it's interesting that knowing all of that, even Craig is admitting all of these good things are happening at Tesla, he's still bearish on the company. And so one thing that confirms that is he's asked, do you think it was smart for Tesla to actually raise his money? And he says, yes, absolutely. So it sounds like Craig is really scraping the bottom of the barrel to be bearish on the stock. He even admits that it was a good idea for them to raise money, which was a top concern or a point of concern for the bears for the longest time. The bears need to make it known that Tesla has no money, but this goes against the bearish thesis quite heavily. Last year, everyone was super negative on Tesla because they believed that Tesla was backed into a corner and didn't have any cash. So it's hard to tell right now if Craig is a bull or bear on the stock because he really doesn't have any bearish data points to work with over here. The other thing that Craig mentions is that he thinks that Tesla is worth $350 per share right now. So hang on a second. Just a few months ago, that would have made him one of the most bullish analysts on the street. In mid-December, when the stock was at $400, Craig said that it should have been at $250 per share, and it was getting frothy up here at the $400 level. So in 2 months, he's actually upped his price target by $100 per share, and of course, Tesla stock has more than doubled over that time period. So it's interesting to see how his price target has actually creeped up quite slowly, even though relative to where the stock price is today, it's actually quite low. It's also interesting to note that analysts for Tesla have 43 sells, 37 holds, and 20 buys on the stock, and holds are basically sells. So there's still a lot of negativity around Tesla, which is good because these analysts will eventually need to upgrade their price targets at some point. Sometimes they raise their price targets when the stock goes up, but they maintain the sell rating. So it seems like Craig Irwin has done just that. So Gene Munster chimes in and he's pretty funny. He says that the bull and bear debate is still quite relevant. So Gene's pretty smart, and I think that was nice of him to do because Craig's points weren't really that strong, and I think Gene was helping him a bit to save face. But he is right. Just because the stock has been on a tear, just because it's been up and it's been on the bull's side, it can still go down, and you simply can't write off the bears or the negative things that could potentially happen. So Gene says, and he's hammered this point home multiple times, that the future is about electric and autonomous. And if this giant market is making this shift, and we know that it is, Gene calls it an undeniable truth. Then why would you bet against a leader in that space? If you think the entire market is shifting to something new, why would you bet against Tesla? So he says that people that are negative on Tesla are missing this huge industry shift. Regardless of whether you think Tesla's going to win or not, if the entire market is changing and Tesla is a player, I think that it's like jumping in front of a train. And not only that, but Tesla is currently the leader in the space. And so he says it would not be a theme I would want to be negative on. And so it's pretty funny because Craig fires back with, I'm actually very bullish on EVs, a big believer on EVs. So that's pretty funny. And I've been saying that it's been pretty great actually to have bears around. And I think that's what's helping to cause Tesla stock to go higher, because the bear argument is getting to be a little bit ridiculous and laughable, and it makes you want to take the opposite side. And so I think the bears are being converted into bulls, and that's why we've seen Tesla stock go up. That said, Craig isn't exactly a bull, and he says that this is really a bet on whether you think it will take 2 years for the other automakers to catch up or 10 years. Clearly he's in the 2-year camp, but Tesla seems to have a lead in certain areas that other automakers have never even considered. So for example, in terms of vertical integration, Tesla has more control and a lead in their OTA, over-the-air technology solution, or their AI chip, for example, or the supercharger network. Tesla has full control. They can say something like free supercharging for Tesla owners today if they wanted to. You can't do that on someone else's network where you don't control the price. So other auto manufacturers would have to build out their own networks. But I don't see them vertically integrating themselves, cutting out half their suppliers and dealers, and hiring all new software and hardware development expertise and battery experts within the next 2 years. Most cars are planned 3 to 5 years in advance, and I think a lot of these automakers have to go back to the drawing board every time Tesla adds more range, for example, to their vehicles. And even at some point in the future when these automakers do catch up, Tesla will be even further ahead than they are now. And again, they haven't been able to beat the efficiency of the 2012 Model S yet. So Gene Munster says that he's in the 10-year camp actually. He believes it'll take maybe 10 years for the other automakers to catch up if they're somehow able to do that. He says that he sat down with a top 10 auto manufacturer who's been around for 85 years, and he said it was in Japan. And they said just because they've been around for a long time, so they're admitting this, it doesn't mean that they have a future. They're going to have to make some big changes. So that's exactly correct, but I think that the amount of changes that they have to make might be larger than some of these automakers can actually handle. Like, it sounds pretty easy to say you're going to make changes, but I'd like to say that it's been very difficult to make big changes in any industry, especially one that hasn't really seen dramatic change in the last 100 years. They just make small incremental changes year after year in the auto industry, and so it's going to be very difficult to shift the entire business to something else. Changing the entire underlying technology and business model could possibly be borderline impossible. I think many automakers will actually fail trying to stay current with the future, and in the phone industry, we saw Nokia, Motorola, and Ericsson. You can say that they didn't see Apple coming, but they did. They just couldn't really do anything in time about it. And in the phone industry, these are little phones we're talking about. Now let's switch to cars, which are much more difficult to manufacture. There's high barriers to entry to build a new factory, and there's just these entrenched auto players in a fragmented market. So it's very much the same setup as it was in phones. So Gene says that this is actually a very dire situation, and he does say that he thinks that the current automotive is 10 years behind. And he believes that in 10 years, some of the top automotive companies may still be in business, but they're going to be on track to going out of business. And so I think that they're actually currently on track to going out of business, but he does say that it'll probably take longer than people think. And I believe that the reason for that is something that Elon Musk spoke about, which is that automotive companies make a lot of money from supplying parts, very high margin parts, for services at extremely high prices. So they can practically give their cars away or sell them at a loss or sell no cars at all for multiple years, is what Elon Musk was saying, and still make hefty profits for quite some time on their current fleet, which is sort of funding their business. And that's also one reason why it's very difficult to start a new car company when you don't have this advantage of the current fleet basically being your cash cow and supplying you with money, while your current business of selling cars either breaks even or loses money. So for that reason, it might take a little bit longer for these traditional automakers to go bankrupt. If you look back to the recession, however, and I know a lot of car companies weren't operating as efficiently as they are now, but it didn't take much to bankrupt pretty much every automotive company in about 2 years. So the rise of Tesla, I think, is almost like a car market recession for every other brand. And a lot of these car companies also have these pension plans and dealerships which are attached to them and can really sink them. I was even reading an article today that was talking about how Tesla is slowly putting Germany into a recession, of course, which is Germany's the home of many large automakers. And so I think this is actually just the beginning. I mean, we've even heard from BMW maybe a year ago. They said they were feeling the pressure from Tesla in the luxury market. So really, like, Tesla only sold 367 cars in the last year. What happens when they sell 600,000 cars or a million cars? So I think these companies, like BMW, are in big trouble. So Craig's argument is that some of the brightest people that he's ever met in batteries have been inside the European OEMs. That's all he says. So I don't think that's an argument at all. That's just a fun fact. And maybe Craig has never met the actual brightest people in batteries, which would make this less of a fact and not very fun. But he says that they have state money behind them to build big factories, these other automakers. So again, two things. Most of them have tons of cash anyway, and they can already build whatever they want. Unfortunately, they're busy closing factories because they have the wrong type of factories for which they have hundreds of millions of dollars invested in. It's also going to be tough to back out of those. So I don't think the state is going to be very happy about this. Also, wherever Tesla seems to go, for example, China and Germany, they always seem to be welcomed. And those countries want Tesla to build factories there because those factories will be creating jobs for the future. So Craig Irwin goes on to say, Tesla has no structural, strategic, long-term advantage. I actually think that maybe Jim Chanos or Bob Lutz also said this quote. So actually they have a bunch of advantages, but in terms of structural, they don't have this Ponzi scheme pension plans attached to them, and they also don't have dealerships, both of which become huge problems when things turn negative. So structurally, in terms of how they make cars, they're also not very vertically integrated, and that's a pretty big structural issue in terms of the speed and innovation that you can operate at. Also, by long term, he means that automakers will eventually catch up, but if they're all bankrupt in 5 to 10 years, they're going to have a pretty difficult time trying to catch up after that. His other argument is that Tesla has made the category successful, and now all the other car makers can make EVs. So I think that's equivalent to how Apple made the smartphone category successful. So I think that's going to be unfortunate for all the other automakers, which aren't really participating in the category that Tesla has created. None of them have specs like Tesla's, and when they eventually get there, they're going to be behind on computer hardware and software, similar to how Apple is so far ahead on these measures. So I think the best part of where Craig either messes up his argument or doesn't really understand what he's saying, when asked if Tesla's innovation will keep them ahead, he replies by saying, well, it's actually risk appetite. Tesla is willing to take big risks, whereas traditional OEMs don't want to take risks that can hurt their main business. And you could hear in the background, I think either Gene or somebody from CNBC saying, exactly. And I think that's one of the main things that will actually cause the automakers to fail. They're afraid to take big risks and move their business into the future. And they're going to need to do that, but they won't because they have these huge combustion engine businesses that they need to take care of that are attached to them, and they can't let those go. So Craig thinks that they have the ability and the talent to do that, to take these big risks. But on the other hand, he just said that they simply won't do it because they don't want to risk their current businesses. So it's not really the best argument, and it does highlight the big problems that the rest of the auto industry has. So Gene says that the idea that traditional auto is going to somehow catch up, they basically have to re-engineer their production and go through the same pain that Tesla went through. So I think that's part of it, but I don't actually believe that the other automakers do have the talent to actually catch up to Tesla, because a lot of it is software, which they have no historical expertise or talent in. And the other thing that Gene says is that they're going to have to sell cars at a loss. So they have these cash cows and will need to displace that with money-losing cars. So that's a pretty dangerous combination. Craig said that they have huge leverage already, and Tesla just has the time from the last few years of them operating. And that's the only advantage that Tesla actually has. So I think that's a very high-level way to say nothing at all. I think Tesla's been working 100 times faster over the last 12 years than these other automakers. Once the Model 3 factory got going at the end of 2018, the last 2 quarters, then everyone thought that they would fail again at the beginning of 2019. But again, with the last 2 quarters of 2019, that was sort of a wake-up call, and all these other companies started to pay attention. So they're really late to the party, and Tesla managed to catch up to them. So Tesla is the one catching up, in my opinion. Now they're working on scaling. Tesla's scaling their business by opening Gigafactory after Gigafactory at such a rate that nobody seems to know what's going on. And so I think Tesla's actually moving much faster, and they're much more nimble. Technically, Tesla has full control over their own business. They can shift their business model to whatever they want in just a couple months, whereas the other automakers, it could take years for them to make these larger changes. So finally, the host, Joe, asks Gene Munster, if electric is 2% of the market now, how does it get to 50% in the next 5 years? And so Gene says, I don't know about that, but it's definitely going to 100% in the next 20 or 30 years. And the reason for that, he says, is because it's a better product, less things break, and it's a better experience. So I think that's a pretty bold statement that he believes it's going to 100%. And we have seen countries start to ban ICE vehicles after a certain time, maybe 2025 or 2030. So I think Gene might actually be right. In 20 to 30 years, you won't see any of these new vehicles, ICE vehicles being produced. You'll only see electric vehicles. And again, it's also probably an environmental concern. And so I guess the reason of it just being a better experience is similar to how you know that everyone will switch to a smartphone from a dumb regular cell phone. It's the same reason, it's just a better product and a better experience for that as well. So it's a pretty good answer that he gives. And at the same time, how do you stay bearish on Tesla or on electric vehicles? And Tesla seems to be one of the main companies that's a purely electric play. So how do you stay bearish on that when the rising tide of electric vehicles is lifting all boats, or at least the boats that aren't anchored down by their combustion engine businesses or bureaucracies that are holding them back from taking the risky move into electric vehicles? Alright guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the bell button and be notified when we create new Tesla content, and also smash the like button to help support this video. Thanks so much for watching.